How did you survive without Twitter? I mean,
It
that
was
was
cold turkey at first. It was really frustrating because, I see people say things that were like just not true, like straight
right.
up. And I was like, even friends. And I was like, "What the I can't, I can't, I can't report."
So I want to go over some of the big things that have been in the media that, are, well, okay, I want to, this, because this one was just so silly. One of the big things that Trump put out was in May of this year that he's going to kill off gain of function research. They're going to rein some of that in. And, they've been working on this executive order. So this is not a law. This is an executive order that Trump's putting out a policy. And then this article came out in the Daily Caller that made all these accusations against the NIH. And what was amazing at the time is when I read that article, I knew it was wrong because I had already been leaked like 2 months prior some internal emails from what happened in the last process. And I looked at the emails and I was like, wow, there's a lot of people involved. You got DOD, you got HHS, you got CIA, you got FBI. And then I'm reading this Daily Caller story that basically says the NIH is trying to undermine the White House. I remember my first thought was, how do they do that? So, I just want to go through some questions here. I just want to make sure. Do you control the Department of Justice from the NIH?
I do not, Paul.
Okay.
I do not.
I want to make sure that, because, do you control the CIA? Because they're also involved in this. Do you control the CIA?
I do not control the CIA, Paul.
How
I
about
don't
the
think they
Department of
listen to
Justice?
me.
How about Department of Justice? Do you control the Department of
No, I
Justice?
don't. I don't control the DOJ. I don't control the DOD.
You don't control the White
Oh,
House either.
actually, I guess they're called the Department of War now. But yeah, I don't control them either.
Right, right, right. So basically, the White House is in charge of this policy that's supposed to be coming out sometime soon. What was that like dealing with? I mean, there's still stuff on Twitter about how why is the NIH trying to undermine what's happening and you're not in charge of this? The White House is in charge. I mean, what do you? I mean,
It's well,
I have friends, I have people inside the NIH that I was talking to at the time because I was confused at the time. They're like, this makes no sense. I mean, what
it
were you
didn't make
doing
any. It's
internal?
actually quite frustrating. This is part of the. Okay, let me try. Let's back up and let me just make a defense about anxiety and worry about the NIH around this issue of dangerous gain of function. Right. So
Right,
the last process, something weirdly called the P3CO process, that was put in place in 2017 in the dying days
right.
of the Obama administration.
So
That
that's the emails that I have when that process came out, and I was given those emails by someone inside the intelligence community. And you can see when that process came out, there's it's 4 pages of emails of the people that were involved, and there's only I think 6 or 7 of them are from the NIH, but there's people from
yeah,
all over.
like
I have no clue.
just to
Yeah,
back up and give context, right? That's in 2017. What had happened was that there had been a pause put in place in all dangerous gain of function
right,
research during the Obama administration. Tony Fauci and Francis Collins fought against that pause. There was a famous Washington Post op-ed that they wrote together in, I think it was 2011 or 2012, with the title "A Flu Risk Worth Taking," where they made the argument that doing this kind of dangerous gain of function work was necessary to be able to predict and prevent future pandemics. So even if there was a risk of leaking, a lab leak, that it was a risk worth taking. They
right,
lost that policy fight. There was a pause, but they put in place a new regulatory framework across the whole government, not just the NIH, not
right,
they, like the White House put together a
right,
regulatory framework across the whole government, because it's not just the NIH where this kind of potentially dangerous research happens. It happens at the
right.
USDA, potentially it happens at the DOW, it happens to a whole host of government agencies support research that potentially could fit in this bucket of, if it leaks, then you could cause a pandemic.
Well, also the other thing that I found out from talking to people inside the intelligence community is it's not just the people funding and doing the research. You also have to have this agreement across the government because DoD is monitoring this stuff in other countries. State Department is negotiating, treaties on this issue. I didn't realize, I did not understand that it was so complex until actually I got these emails.
Yeah, it touches a very large number of agencies in the government. It has to be coordinated. It has to be carefully managed. It can't just be one. I mean, the NIH is a major player in it, absolutely, because we fund biomedical research. Most of it,
Right,
the vast majority of it, have no chance of causing a pandemic. The question is the small sliver of research that has the chance of causing a pandemic. Now, that process, that 2017 P3CO process, involved the whole government. But let me
right,
just make a defense of what some of the reporting. Um, in 2017, what happened was that process that was put in place, this P3CO process, involved checking from a list of pathogens. Says, are you working on Ebola? Are you working on some things that are dangerous?
Right.
And it relied on essentially a self-reporting process where, like, the agencies would offer up a grant that looks like it checked the box on one of the lists, and then there'd be a group of people, like three or four, of a few people with expertise in deciding whether this was actually dangerous or not.
Right.
Whether in the entire history of the P3CO process from 2017 to 2025, exactly four grants, three or four grants, I've heard different accounts, went up to the group of people that were deciding whether it was dangerous.
Right.
And so including like the proposals to do research in Wuhan on coronaviruses, that didn't go up the process. That was
Right.
never even considered in the process where like a group of experts got to decide whether or not the thing should go forward. There was a policy in place and it was toothless. And the
Right.
NIH played a role, not the only role, but it played a role in making the process toothless,
Right.
right?
Now,
So in 2017.
one of the things that I heard is that the NIH was giving a lot of passes to various grants instead of running them through the P3CO process. And apparently, the sign off for allowing them to not go through the process, Senator Rand Paul has documents showing that this happened. He's sitting over it in his committee. I've been told this by Senate staffers that he has the whole list. I don't know why he's not come out with this.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely true. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't in, obviously I was a Stanford professor. You say I was largely known among health economists, and I wasn't like part of any of these deliberations at the time, and between 2017 and 2025. But you can see what the outcomes of it. Only three grants went up, or four
Right.
grants went up to the for consideration in this P3CO process during the whole entirety of 2017 to 2025. And as far as I know, I don't think any DoD grants went up, no grants from USDA went up. It was basically a toothless process for the entire government, even though the entire government spent a lot of effort trying to coordinate that process and put it into place right before Obama left office.
Right.
Okay, so all right, so that's the backdrop of what happened this year.
Right.
I think there are people who were very frustrated on the outside, pushing for the government to not do this kind of research and to
Right.
have a regulatory process that oversaw it. And so, of course, there's like a lot of distrust. Like once I learned of this, sometime around 2021, I became distrustful of the government on this. Like I
Right.
didn't just between 2021 and 2025, I tried between and I'm sorry, 2024 and President Trump's election. I was deeply frustrated during the Biden administration because really clear to me they were not taking their obligation to regulate this work seriously. And
Right.
there was a renewed process to try to figure out to strengthen it right at the end of the Biden administration.
Okay.
And there were people that had put together a process that was supposedly going to work better than the P3CO process, but it took 4 years.
Right.
And it was run by the White House, just as it should be, because the White House coordinates across all of the different agencies. The version of the regulatory process that had been put forward at the end of the Biden years to revise the PTCO process was this long, complicated document with like to my eyes obvious loopholes, right? So
Okay.
again, it focused on a list of pathogens that said, are you working on Ebola? Are you working on West Nile virus or whatever? And it was a list based thing with like exceptions, and it looked just unworkable to me. The process that we've had now is a risk based process. That's the idea
Okay.
that the White House is more working on. Instead of saying, are you working on a list of one of a list of pathogens? The question is the research you're doing, does it pose a potential existential threat to
Right.
humankind? Does it have a chance of causing a pandemic? Because for instance, the research that likely caused the pandemic was on a virus pulled out of a bat cave in China that was not on no list anywhere,
Right. Right.
right? And so the question, but was it risky? Yeah, it was risky. So the new process, the focus is risk, making sure that there's you have a sense of the expert eyes get to see and oversee other people's proposed work to assess the risk of causing a pandemic. Second, uh, accountability, to make sure that every part of this chain of deciding whether you get to do this research, you have accountability, right? So the researcher, if they fail to report up a risk, they potentially face severe penalties if ex post people decide that they were taking a risk. The institution where the researcher is doing the work, they're going to face severe penalties if they don't oversee the researcher to make sure that they report up the chain anything that potentially has a risk. There's the institutions like the NIH. We also are going to have to face to like be overseen by independent body, not us. It shouldn't be us checking our own home.
'Cause that last process basically was the NIH checking itself, right? I mean, the NIH would decide whether this grant looks risky or not, and we'll run it through this process, and we're controlling the process. That was a
Yeah.
weird.
Well, I mean, I don't think the NIH controlled the people that were supposed to evaluate the grants at but
Right.
the NIH did decide whether to send the grant up to the process, and the same thing for the DOW, for USDA, all the other entities of the government. They all get to decide, but there was no accountability in that decision. Um, the new process, I mean, it's still work. The White House is still working on it, but I have a lot of hope that it's going to be risk based. It's going to have accountability at the core of it for every single decision maker, as well as penalties for if they fail to report. The key thing will be, um, as I said earlier, Paul, most of research, biomedical research, has no potential harm of causing a pandemic. It's only a small sliver of it. The key
Right.
idea is report up more than the sliver. Let the expert independent body, whatever it turns out to be, do an evaluation of the risk and check the homework of all the different entities that are doing this kind of grant funding, including the NIH, um, and then make a risk-based decision. If there's any risk
Right.
of causing a pandemic, no, you can't do it. If there is no risk, you've reported up things that you think someone might think there's a risk, but it turns out there isn't. Then you get permission to do it. Right? It's going to be a risk-based framework where everyone's checking each other's homework, and there's penalties involved if you don't report.